So here goes the afternoon. And Brian Kennedy is somebody who I've gotten to know also over the years. We obviously swim in these same waters. He is the chair of the Committee on the Present Danger China, an expert on just pretty much everything related to securing America, from the elections to China, to absolutely every aspect of everything that we're doing. You can, again, read his bio in the program. Please welcome Brian Kennedy.
You know, I'm a pretty contrary guy. You know, I hear all these depressing people this morning, and I think, you know, it can't be really that bad, can it? Because I'm an optimist, and we Americans are optimists. We don't look, you know, we don't look down all the time. And I was reminded, Trevor mentioned that he might not be here but for those Americans hitting the beaches in the Pacific. And my father was a Marine in World War II. And he landed at Tarawa, Saipan, and Tinian, three arguably of the bloodiest battles in World War II. And each time he landed, he was on a Higgins boat. You know what those are. They're portrayed in the movies where they hit the beach and the door comes down. And in the movies, very often, you know, there's machine guns shooting at the people in the Higgins boats. And my dad landed on 3 beaches in 3 of the bloodiest battles. And all 3 times there was no one shooting at them. And all the Marines got off, hit the beach, and took the islands. So my dad, who became an LA policeman, he was a Marine, World War II, LA policeman, thought he was one of the luckiest people around. I, his son, think I'm one of the luckiest people around. And we owe it to our countrymen to explain these things to them, because we are a very blessed people. And no one is luckier than we Americans. And so that's why we're here, right? To learn all these things so that we can explain this to other people. And it's good to do it with people you enjoy, and I enjoy the people here in Atlanta. One of my heroes is here, Garland Favorito, who has, I think, done more than nearly anybody to try to bring some logic to our elections. My colleague, Bob Curry, who is interested, like I am, in a variety of policy issues, has been saying for the past 3.5 years, the election is not a thing. It is the thing. It is the only thing. The only thing. All these policy issues we talk about, and I love patents and innovation. I don't mean to denigrate at all from what Jenny Beth said. But if we don't win the election, we don't fix anything. Period. And getting these things right, having a free and fair election where our ideas can be expressed in a free and fair way. The thing they're stealing from us when they steal an election is our freedom of the mind, our freedom to think as human beings, because that is taken away from us. And we don't know what the results of an election are, do we? We don't know whether this idea has more power than that idea. We're left in a world where we're meant to believe today Joe Biden and his ideas got 81 million votes. When, of course, most Americans just look at each other and they think that can't be. Right? That can't be. That can't have happened. Or if it did happen, then we'd like it demonstrated to us, please, that the system was free and fair and open, and that way we can have an honest debate with our countrymen about the nature of the society we live in. But when you steal an election, you steal that from us, that ability to live as a free human being. And as Trevor was so eloquently saying, we're in the middle of a communist revolution. And like in the old, you know, I say the old days, like 20 years ago, I'd, be calling someone a communist, and my wife would say, what are you doing? Not everybody's a communist. And I'd be like, I'm pretty close, And today, these people are actually communists. They think like communists. They say they're communist. They join communist organizations. They express themselves as communists using that kind of language. Now, in a way, I kind of find that refreshing. I feel when I hear a communist speak publicly as if their ideas can beat our ideas, I know we're going to win. I have a friend, I was on the board for many years of my Catholic all-boys school in Southern California, and we have a very good high school football team. And, you know, we compete for the national championship every year for about the last decade. So I get these, you know, have these long discussions with the football coach at the start of the season, like, are we going to win the championship this year? I know people in Georgia care about football, so I'm bringing this up. And he'd say, you know, gosh, you know, we have like, you know, all these top players, but, you know, this school over here, you know, they've been absolutely ruthless in recruiting, you know, these other people. And you kind of throw up your hands and you think, well, they could recruit anybody they want to. I'd still rather be us than them, right? I'd rather be us Americans than anybody else. I'd rather be us who believe in the ideals of human freedom than anybody else. We just need to get really good at politics. You can see the left, as Trevor and Sam and others were saying, the left is very good in politics. We suck, right? We're running our businesses, we're raising our families, we go to church, we go shooting on the weekends. We do the kind of things that free people do. We don't wake up in the morning thinking we have to engage in politics, whereas the left does. Now is the time for us to wake up in the morning believing we need to engage in politics, both persuading our countrymen and making sure there's a free and fair election. It is the only thing. Now, let me say a few things and try to describe the purpose of my remarks, which is really to understand the war in this country between communist China and the United States. Let me make 3 points. One is, first and foremost, we're in a political war. Keyword, war. We're, you know, like all war, it involves psychological warfare, information warfare, and political warfare. We are in the political warfare stage. We need to understand that. The second is, I think we've been engaged in massive self-deception over the past 20 years about both our role in the world and the nature of our enemies. And my final point really will be about communist China. I think we misunderstand them fundamentally. First, the political war. We've been told for the better part of, 100 years that we're a bad country, filled with bad people. We're racist, sexist, xenophobic. We had slavery. Capitalism is bad. The nuclear family is bad. We're bad. It has been meant to demoralize us. It's a communist tactic to demoralize us. It will not work because Americans wake up every morning and they go and they work hard and they raise their families and they think that's a good thing. They look out at the world they've created in this country and they believe that's a good thing. And yet the communists are relentless. They have beaten down Americans to the point where we accept in our great universities this idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is utter nonsense, right? It's a way of playing with the language that we trade in. Diversity. Well, we're all for, I don't care about the color of your skin. And guess what? We haven't cared about the color of your skin for an awfully long time. Equity? What is equity? It's a way of, again, playing with the language. What's equity? It's a way of bastardizing the principle of human equality. Inclusion. Inclusion really is a way of saying we're going to need to exclude you. Not include you, exclude you, you people who are Americans. It's been foisted upon us by an ideology of, let's call it elitism, as opposed to populism. But the elitist view was that we're the ruling class, we understand all these things. We're going to take your children, we're going to send them through our universities, and we're going to throw them out on the other side. They're going to believe all things, and they're going to correct the sins of the parents, much really simply the way communists think. We're going to destroy your families. We're going to change the way you live. We're going to change your young people. And we're going to make a new society. And we Americans in this political war, we're focused primarily again on working hard, raising our families, etc. And we didn't really see this going on. That there was a credentialed class in this country. My colleague Angelo Codavilla called it the ruling class. That ruling class thought that those credentials really mattered. So you had to send your kids to the university because they needed that credential in order to work in a modern economy. And yet, what they were really doing is trying to indoctrinate the American people on something that was very foreign to them. Very foreign to them. Americans used to believe in God and hard work and the kind of things that made the country great. And of course, it's patent laws and laws in general. But who thinks that we have a constitution today? We pay a lot of lip service to it, but do we have a constitution? Do we have the rule of law? Do we have due process? Garland has a court case that was brought, I think, pretty sure in 2021 that is yet to be heard, or is still in the process of being heard, right? Abe Hamadeh in Arizona, and I say this as a way of coloring the rest of what I have to say, but Abe Hamadeh in Arizona ran for attorney general. And he lost by, I think, around 300 votes with 8,000 or 9,000 ballots yet to be counted. But because the Democrats controlled the apparatus of the election system, those 8,000 ballots, which they think would break 80-20 for Abe Hamadeh, they've never been counted. He's been in court. He's been in court, and with 300 votes separating them, with 8,000 ballots outstanding, we've not found a court in the land that would hear that case. Now, why is that? Because the courts, the weakest branch of the government, is very reluctant to engage in the political process, apparently, in any way. In 2020, even though the black letter of the law was violated in all sorts of states around the union when it came to the use of mail-in balloting, again, black letter of the law violations, no court would take it up because they did not want to insert themselves. So when we think about the rule of law, the Constitution, the things that made America great, that's been lost. Let me be clear, that has been lost. America as you know it has been lost. We're in the process of remaking it. We're going to find out in November whether we can remake it or not. And if we can save the country. And if we can't, then there'll be something else going on here. And the American people are looking very hard at this. And they don't know quite what to do. They've been demoralized. They've been disoriented. And now they're trying to figure this out so that the kind of things we take away from this kind of a conference and these kind of conversations have to be designed to remoralize the American people. Remoralize. Because they are still a good people with a good country. Fully capable of being self-governing. Fully capable of having constitutional government again. If you can have a political class beginning with a president who respects the rule of law. If you can do that, you can save the country. If you can't do that, something else will happen. Pure and simple. And again, without being at all dramatic, all the policy recommendations in the world will not matter. It will not matter that we stop the WHO. And I'm sure Frank is in the outer corridor on a call about the WHO trying to kill it. But if we lose in the fall, it will be back. Guaranteed. Because there'll be nothing stopping them from tyrannizing us more than they already are. We have to have that kind of clarity. Because I guarantee you, especially, I will say, especially in a wealthy state like Georgia, and Georgia's a wealthy state, things are so good in so many ways that they think, well, you know, Joe Biden, 4 more years, everything's going to be okay. And again, I say that not in a partisan way. This is not a partisan setting. I'm just being objective about, and again, but I'm speaking, when I speak politically, I'm speaking as a private citizen, not as someone who runs a nonprofit, of course. Objectively, the policies of Joe Biden are leading us to destruction. And so I'm not saying vote for Donald Trump. That's not the purpose of this venue. What I'm saying is you need to look at your country very closely and see what is possible if we continue down this path. Because as I say, I think that is destruction. Which brings me really to my second point, which is the nature of the problem we're in. For the better part of 2 decades, we conservatives have been thumping our chest thinking we won the Cold War. Again, not to be just contrary, but I don't think we won the Cold War. It was not a war to win. It's like the football team. We win the national championship a few years ago. Everybody's celebrating that night. The big, supporters in the room think, man, this is pretty cool, winning a national championship. We got to do this again next year. And then on Monday, everybody gets to winning another national championship. It's going to take another year, but hey, we're in the business of winning, right? You look at the Cold War. We celebrated winning the Cold War. And the Soviet Union reorganized into Russia and its constituent parts. Did we disarm them? Did we create in that country a free democratic society? Or did we watch as a intelligence-oriented political establishment got created kind of the way we could have expected it to be created, that would run Russia in the corrupt, communistic way it has been run? Fully armed with nuclear weapons that they still continue to supply all those years to Iran, North Korea, and the like. We won the Cold War. Did we disarm communist China? No. We didn't think of it in quite those terms, and yet Russia and communist China were allies then, just as they are allies now. Which means we didn't understand fundamentally what was going on. Such was the distraction and disorientation within American society among American elites. There are not grown-ups inside the Pentagon or inside the CIA and our intelligence community that are here to help us, to defend us. They're not here to come save us. That's not going to happen. They're a part of a global project to go do something else. And so when we think about the Cold War and America's place in the world, like Chris Coons on that video, that's purely performative. We put legislation in front of that guy on communist China, he shoots it all down. He's not going to hold them to account. He'll do videos because he wants to appeal to the business community in his state. He's not on our side. What has happened to us? Winning the Cold War cost us something very dear, which is the intellectual seriousness that used to guide this country. We used to be very serious. Republicans and Democrats alike thought we could lose this country. And they worked together, not perfectly, but they worked together both in Congress and in the Pentagon and in the broader society to make sure we were defended. Winning the Cold War meant that seriousness went away. That has hurt us mightily. People often say, well, what would Thomas Jefferson and John Adams or George Washington think about all this? They'd be turning in their grave. I kind of think, no, they wouldn't. They would not be surprised. Founding this country was a tough slog, not so easy to do. they had a very hard time of it. They had to both beat the British and convince, these crazy Americans in this country that they had to fight for their freedom. I think if George Washington were here, he'd think, man, kind of thought this could happen. Didn't think it might happen this way, but yeah, it's hard. You Americans are going to have to step it up here. Which brings me to my final point, and that's focusing on communist China and this coming election. Communist China spends $16 billion a year in intelligence and influence operations in this country. $16 billion annually. That's a lot of money. By any objective standard, that's a lot of money. They buy up all the journalists they want. And again, they don't, it's not like someone from the CCP is sitting down with a table of journalists, but they have people, Americans typically, that they have funneled money through to make sure that their point of view is represented to the journalistic community, to the academic community. They buy up the big law firms in D.C. and New York, the big PR firms in D.C. and New York. Go try to sue communist China and see if you can hire a firm in Washington, D.C. to do it. Try. They're going to say, we'd love to take on your case, whatever that case may be. But we're conflicted because we represent the following 12 Chinese companies that are tied to the Chinese Communist Party, as every Chinese company is. So I'm sorry, we're not going to represent you. Okay. Communist China sees that Americans can be corrupted because we're just humans. You throw enough money in front of us, we get corrupted. And there's nothing stopping that. So they spread the money around. They buy up influence everywhere they can. The Chamber of Commerce, which is, designed to promote American business, is going to be on the side of communist China because so many businesses are. And you throw enough money around and you get a lot of power in American society. And so communist China saw Donald Trump, and he gets elected to office. And I say this again, not in a partisan way, but Trump comes and he really is part of the remoralization of America. He says, let's make America great again, which would suggest to you it was great before, because it was. And he's going to make it great again. And he's going to put the interests of the American people first. And that discussion on that video of intellectual property theft, which is added up to about $6 trillion, it is when Trump said, we're going to stop that theft of intellectual property. And he really sent Robert Lighthizer and others to stop it, that the Chinese in May of 2019 declared a people's war against the United States in the pages of People's Daily. A people's war. They were telling their own people, wasn't really for us, it was for their own people, that sacrifices may have to be made over the coming years because we're having a people's war against the United States because they're not going to tell us what to do. Period. Within 6 months, COVID is spreading throughout the United States and the world. Within 6 months of that, we're in lockdown. Within 6 months of that, a presidential election has to be held in this country where the use of mail-in balloting is preeminent around the country. Rallies that were the heart of the Trump movement cannot take place or only in very limited fashion. Now, if you're communist China and you have 1.4 billion people and they're very smart and they're very hardworking and they think about these things and they know they're engaged in a political war with us, do you think they could have imagined somehow that it might be good to make sure that, one, President Trump couldn't talk easily to his people, that we would be locked down and disoriented, and that we would have to use mail-in balloting, which both Republicans and Democrats have said are not a good way of typically having an election? Could they have thought through that if this was a political war? because it seems like that's what happened. And it seems like not a bad strategy if you're them. Again, they're not 10 feet tall, but it was the kind of game to be played that, you look at American society, how much do we spend on healthcare in this country? We were talking about this last night. 20 to 30% on healthcare of our GDP. We're a rich country. What do rich people do? They spend money on healthcare because now that you've solved life's basic needs, you worry about healthcare. Would those kind of people, these Americans who worry about their healthcare, if we presented to them a pandemic that would force them to lock down, would they buy into that? And the answer was yes, and they did. Even an America First president was told by this health establishment around him that you had to do this. If we don't do this, my God, man, what would happen? Today, we have been living through Joe Biden and the dismantling of American society, in my judgment. We have entered a political year here in 2024 where, again, Communist China, which spends $16 billion annually, would they think to themselves, we spend $16 billion a year on influencing the United States, but these American presidential elections, those are sacred. We watch MSNBC, right? This is democracy. We couldn't think about interfering in that. Or would they do whatever they could to influence an American election to their liking? It's a war. There are no rules, period. We had discussions on our webinars of the Committee on the Present Danger China about these laboratories, one in Reedley, California, where they were having, what looks like weapons-grade bioweapons being made. So we don't know really what's going on with all sorts of Chinese businesses around the country. But I've been trying to get through to people the idea that could Communist China, which has these resources, could they have factories in the 7 swing states that decide presidential elections? Could you use your imagination, let's say, and just think, could they print up 1 million ballots in each of the 7 swing states and vote for Joe Biden? Just use your imagination. They have the factories, they have the printing presses, they have access to the paper that's used for the mail-in balloting, they have printers, of course, that can print them up, they have access to the voter rolls, they have access to your signature within the voter rolls. The idea that they couldn't have a, penetration of the system to extract your signature. Through artificial intelligence, it would take less than an afternoon's work to collect up all your signatures from all your banks. Right? How many times do you sign, if not daily, weekly, either a check or a credit card slip? Do they have access to all that through artificial intelligence? Yes. And I say this not to be demoralizing, not to discourage anyone, but to understand the truth, as Trevor was saying. What is the truth of the matter? The truth of the matter is that Communist China has the resources to produce ballots and get them inserted into the system, whether it's by mail or other means. During the Cold War, we didn't run our elections this way. When we were serious, we didn't do this. Why? Because we thought the Soviet Union, which was engaged in all sorts of bad things throughout this country, might do something there. We had enough to worry about with just normal, Democrat, Republican, nefariousness when it came to these things. Would Communist China, who sees themselves as the masters of the world, would they do this in this election in the fall? And is there any part of our government today that is trying to stop it? That is a crisis of epic proportions. Even more, and I was going to say something about, so you have that, right? The mail-in ballots. Then you have the problem of the machines. And our colleague Steve Bannon often says he's not a machine guy. And I was among the people who investigated in 2020. I investigated Arizona and Nevada. What I thought was the ability to do it through mail-in balloting in 2020 was pretty prominent. But as I've said, and I said this to, I think I've said this in public to I said this testifying before a grand jury in DC about all this. I said, the mere fact that Dominion voting is being used in so many places, the system could be perfectly honest. The machines themselves could be perfectly honest. Okay? Let me just stipulate that. They could be. But it's a Canadian company with offices in Toronto, Canada, Denver, Colorado, and Belgrade, Serbia, running Venezuelan software that they have licensed that generates QR codes that after you get the ballot out of the machine, very often you don't know what you voted. The machine could be perfectly fair, but it doesn't look fair. It doesn't look right. To everyday Americans, common sense would dictate that doesn't sound right. And the system got sold to Staple Street Capital in 2018. And Staple Street Capital, one of their substantial investors was UBS Securities out of Hong Kong, which is affiliated by law with the Chinese Communist Party. When the purchase took place, it was tested in Shanghai by a testing corporation. And this is the system in which we run our elections. Now, again, even if it's completely fair, it doesn't look that way, does it? It looks screwy by any objective standard. How did we used to vote? We voted on paper. We showed our IDs. People watched as they were being counted with other people watching them. That's how it used to work. It's how it still works in many parts of the world. This use of mail-in balloting, the use of these machines, it was created to confuse and make less transparent the system. And you just have to ask yourself why that happened. Now, does that mean that President Trump or any Republican or anybody, that may want to defend freedom is not going to be elected in the fall? No. As I say, the other side is not 10 feet tall. Can you outvote the steal? Well, it didn't happen in 2022, let me say. Can it happen in 2024? I sincerely hope so. Because I will tell you, the Republican Party has not done, as far as I can tell, anything to stop this in those 7 places. In part because it's very difficult to stop it. Once the Democrats control the levers of power in those places, back to my Abe Hamadeh reference, once they control the levers of power, they don't want to let them go. Which means that those candidates who want human freedom in the fall are going to have to win by so much that they're victorious. A really important person, I'll conclude with this, called me the other day and they wanted to know what I thought about how the fall was going to go. And I said, well, there's a 100% chance that they're going to try to steal the election and a 95% chance that they're going to succeed. But somewhere in my heart, I think we're going to win. So I bet on that 5% because I don't think God is going to leave us this way. Which means we have to be a good people too. We have to present ourselves to God in a way to where we deserve to win. And if we do that, we will. Thank you.